My brother once made a joke about bathroom stalls. I laughed at him without thinking much of it. 3 years later, at 3:14 in the morning, that stupid joke became the only reason I walked out of a place where someone else never did. My name is Ethan Parker, and when this happened, I was 28 years old. I worked the overnight shift at Red Hollow Fuel Stop, a small gas station sitting alone along Highway 47 in the New Mexico desert. The place wasn't completely abandoned, but it felt close enough. During the day, truckers filled the pumps, tourists grabbed snacks, and families stopped for coffee before continuing their road trips. After midnight, it became a different world. The road outside turned silent. The wind was the only thing moving through the desert. Sometimes 30 or 40 minutes would pass without a single car pulling into the lot. Cell service barely existed out there. If something happened, you were mostly on your own until sunrise. The building itself had been standing since the late 70s. Years ago, it had been part of a much larger truck stop with a diner, repair garage, and motel. Most of that had been torn down long before I was hired. Only the convenience store and the oversized restrooms remained. The men's bathroom always felt strange to me. 10 stalls, 3 sinks, old white tiles that reflected every sound. It was far bigger than a gas station bathroom ever needed to be. My coworker, Mike Sanders, loved making fun of it. He always said, "This place acts like it's expecting a football team to stop in every 5 minutes." I usually laughed because there wasn't much else to do during 12-hour night shifts. Mike had worked there almost 5 years. I'd only been there for 8 months. He knew every strange noise the building made, every flickering light, every door that refused to close unless you pushed it twice. Nothing ever scared him. At least, that's what I believed. The night it happened started exactly like every other Thursday. Around 3:10 a.m., I stretched behind the counter and looked toward Mike. "I'm gonna use the restroom." Without looking up from his phone, he smirked. "You still say, use the restroom? Just say you're taking a leak like everyone else." I shrugged. My mom would have smacked me if she heard me talk like that. Mike laughed. "Man, you're almost 30. I smiled. Some habits never change. As I started walking toward the hallway leading to the bathrooms, a pair of bright headlights swept across the front windows. A large pickup truck rolled into the parking lot much faster than most people drove at that hour. The engine echoed through the empty desert before shutting off. Mike glanced outside. "Looks like we've finally got a customer." I pointed toward the entrance. "He's all yours." He rolled his eyes. Yeah. I pushed open the hallway door and disappeared toward the back of the building. I had no idea that would be the last normal conversation either of us would ever have. The hallway felt colder than usual. Not freezing, just quiet enough that every step echoed off the old tile walls. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds like they couldn't decide whether to stay on. I pushed open the restroom door. Empty, just like always. 10 stalls stretched along the left wall, all with faded gray doors that had probably been there longer than I had been alive. For some reason, I always chose the last stall. It was farther from the entrance, cleaner than the others, and somehow felt more private. I stepped inside and closed the door. Outside, everything was silent again. For a minute or two, I could only hear the low hum of the air conditioner and the wind brushing against the building. Then, a sharp crash echoed from the front of the store. It sounded like something heavy had hit the floor. I stopped moving. Maybe Mike had dropped a box. Maybe a customer knocked over a display. That happened once in a while. A few seconds later, I heard voices. At least 2 people. One of them was definitely Mike. The other, I'd never heard before. The words were impossible to make out. They were too muffled through the hallway. The conversation grew louder, not yelling, but tense, like 2 people trying very hard not to lose their patience. I looked toward the stall door. Something didn't feel right anymore. Then, everything went completely quiet. The silence lasted only a second. A loud bang suddenly echoed through the building. It wasn't like anything I'd heard inside that gas station before. The sound bounced through the hallway, then disappeared. My heart immediately started racing. Every instinct told me something had gone terribly wrong. I stood perfectly still, waiting, hoping to hear Mike's voice again. Instead, I heard slow footsteps, heavy boots, not running, not panicked, just walking. The sound moved across the store floor, then into the hallway, closer, closer, toward the restroom. I held my breath. Every step echoed a little louder than the last, until finally, the restroom door slowly opened. The restroom door creaked open. For a second, nothing happened. Whoever had entered didn't move. It felt like they were standing just inside the doorway, listening. The room was so quiet that I could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above me. Then, a single boot scraped across the tile. Slow, deliberate. Another step followed. The sound echoed through the empty restroom. I pulled my feet back as quietly as I could and stared at the stall door. My breathing had become so loud that I covered my mouth with one hand. Terrified the sound would give me away. The footsteps stopped. A stall door near the entrance slowly swung open. Its old hinges let out a long, high-pitched creak. A second later, it closed. Then another stall. Creak, pause, shut. Whoever was out there wasn't rushing. They were checking each stall one by one. Every few seconds, another door opened. Another pause. Another door closed. Each sound came closer. The empty restroom suddenly felt much smaller than it had a few minutes earlier. Then, without warning, I remembered something Mike had joked about months before. We'd been cleaning the restroom after closing when he laughed and said, "If I ever had to hide in one of these stalls, I'd never lock the door." I looked at him like he was crazy. "Why not?" He grinned. "Because the first thing anyone checks is a locked stall. An unlocked one looks empty." At the time, I laughed. Now, that stupid joke was the only thing running through my head. My hand slowly reached for the lock. Every tiny movement sounded impossibly loud. The latch clicked. I froze. The footsteps stopped. For one terrifying second, the entire restroom fell silent. I didn't even breathe. Then, the footsteps started again, closer than before. I carefully pushed the stall door open just enough to slip behind it, pressing myself into the narrow space between the metal door and the wall. It was barely wide enough for me to fit. Cold steel pressed against my shoulder. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment. The footsteps stopped, right outside my stall. I couldn't see him, not yet, but I knew he was only a few feet away. The restroom had gone completely silent again. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. It almost felt like he was listening, the same way I was. I kept my back pressed against the cold metal divider, trying not to move a single muscle. Even breathing felt dangerous. Then, the first stall door opened. Creak, a slow pause. Then it closed. Another stall. Another pause. Another door. He wasn't searching quickly. He was taking his time, almost like he wanted to be absolutely certain no one was hiding inside. Every few seconds the sound came closer. Creak, silence. Click, another stall. Creak, silence. Click. I counted them in my head without even realizing it. 1, 2, 3. The sound echoed through the empty restroom until I completely lost track of time. My heartbeat was louder than the doors. Then, the footsteps stopped again. This time, right outside my stall. I stared at the thin strip of light beneath the door. A shadow blocked it. Someone was standing directly in front of me. Every instinct told me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The restroom had only one entrance. The tiny window above the sinks wasn't large enough for anyone to climb through. I was trapped. The handle on my stall door moved. Slowly, the door drifted inward. Since I'd already unlocked it and slipped behind it, the stall looked empty. For one brief second, I actually believed the plan had worked. Then, the door was shoved the rest of the way open. It slammed backward much harder than I expected. The edge of the metal door pressed into my stomach, forcing the air out of my lungs. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to stop myself from making a sound. The door couldn't open completely because of the hinges. It stopped only inches from the wall. Those few inches were the only reason I still had somewhere to hide. I kept my face turned sideways, afraid even the tip of my nose might become visible if I moved. Seconds passed. They felt endless. Whoever stood there didn't say a word. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't even see his shoes anymore. I only knew he was still there, looking into an empty stall, trying to decide if something felt wrong. Then, very slowly, the pressure against the door disappeared. It swung back a few inches on its own. The footsteps moved away. One step, then another. I wanted to believe he was leaving, but the sound didn't head toward the exit. Instead, it stopped at the stall right next to mine. I heard another stall door open, then quietly closed. The latch clicked into place. Someone was now inside the stall beside me, and I realized he hadn't left the restroom at all. The sound of the latch echoed through the restroom. Click. I stared at the wall separating us. Couldn't have been more than a few inches thick. On the other side, someone stood completely still. No movement. No footsteps. Nothing. I told myself he was probably just using the restroom. Maybe he hadn't noticed anything. Maybe I had gotten unbelievably lucky. Then I heard a slow whistle. Soft, calm, completely out of place. The same short tune repeated again and again. It wasn't loud, but in that empty restroom it filled every corner. My hands had started shaking so badly that I had to press them against my legs to stop them. I kept telling myself one thing: just stay quiet. Seconds turned into minutes. I had no idea how long I'd been standing there. Time didn't make sense anymore. Then, the whistling stopped. For a moment, I thought he was finally leaving. Instead, I heard the sink faucet turn on. Water splashed against porcelain. The sound went on much longer than it should have. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 20. It was almost as if he wasn't in any hurry to leave. The faucet shut off. Paper towel dispenser rattled. Then, silence again. I waited. Nothing. No footsteps. No door opening. Just silence. A strange thought suddenly crossed my mind. What if he was waiting for me? The idea hit me so hard that I felt my stomach tighten. If I stepped out too early, I'd be walking straight toward him. I stayed exactly where I was. 1 minute passed. Then another. Finally, I heard footsteps again. This time they moved across the restroom, toward the exit. The restroom door opened. This heavy spring pulled it shut a second later. Bang! Silence returned. Real silence. Even then, I didn't move. Not for 1 second. Fear has a strange way of changing time. What felt like an hour was probably only a few minutes. I kept listening, waiting for those footsteps to come back, waiting for the door to open again. It never did. Then, from somewhere outside, I heard the deep rumble of a pickup truck engine. It idled for a moment. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Slowly, the sound faded into the distance until there was nothing left but the wind outside the building. For the first time since all of this began, I let out a slow breath. I thought maybe it was finally over. I was wrong, because I still hadn't seen what was waiting for me on the other side of that restroom door. I stayed where I was. 5 minutes, maybe 10. I honestly couldn't tell anymore. The only sounds left were the buzzing fluorescent lights and the air conditioner struggling to keep the building cool. Finally, I forced myself to move. My legs felt weak, almost numb, as if they'd forgotten how to stand. I stepped out from behind the stall door and looked around the restroom. Every stall stood open. Every sink was empty. No one was there. I walked to the doorway and listened one last time. Nothing. The hallway outside was just as silent. Slowly, I started walking toward the front of the store. Each step felt heavier than the last. As I got closer, something seemed wrong. The music that usually played through the ceiling speakers had stopped. The front doors were half open. A bag of chips lay crushed in the middle of the aisle. One of the candy racks had been knocked over. I whispered, "Mike!" No answer. I rounded the last corner. The checkout counter came into view. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The cash register drawer had been ripped open. Bills were scattered across the floor. A display of lighters had been knocked over. The store looked like a storm had passed through it. Then I saw Mike. He wasn't moving. I froze. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were telling me. For a few long seconds, I simply stood there. Everything around me felt unreal. The bright store lights, the humming refrigerators, the smell of burnt coffee. It all continued exactly as before, except Mike never answered. I slowly backed away from the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my balance. I reached for my phone. No signal. Just one empty bar. I tried anyway. Nothing. I remembered the emergency radio we'd been promised months ago. The bracket for it had already been installed behind the counter. But the radio itself had never arrived. I looked out through the front windows. The highway was empty. Not a single vehicle. Not a single person. Only darkness stretching across the desert. For the first time in my life, I understood what true isolation felt like. So I did the only thing I could. I locked the front doors, turned off the automatic entrance, and waited for the sun to come up. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was locking the front doors. The next, I was on the floor behind the checkout counter with my back against the wall, staring at the entrance. I didn't trust the silence anymore. Every shadow outside the windows looked like someone standing still. Every gust of wind sounded like another vehicle pulling into the parking lot. My phone remained useless. No signal. I checked it every few minutes anyway, hoping something would change. It never did. Time moved painfully slowly. The digital clock above the coffee machines read 3:41 a.m., then 4:02 a.m., then 4:27 a.m. Each minute felt longer than the last. As the darkness outside slowly began to fade, the outline of the desert became visible through the front windows. For the first time all night, I could actually see the empty highway stretching in both directions. No headlights. No movement. Nothing. Around 5:55 a.m., I spotted a pair of headlights approaching from the east. First, panic hit me all over again. I thought the pickup truck had come back. I ducked behind the counter without even thinking. The vehicle slowed, turned into the parking lot, and stopped. It was the morning delivery van. 2 employees stepped out, talking and laughing as they walked toward the entrance. I jumped to my feet and unlocked the door before they could knock. The moment they saw my face, their smiles disappeared. "Ethan, what happened?" I tried to answer. Nothing came out. I pointed toward the checkout counter with a trembling hand. Neither of them spoke. One reached for his radio while the other gently guided me outside. The cool morning air hit my face, but I barely noticed it. Within minutes, the parking lot filled with sheriff's deputies, investigators, and emergency vehicles. The entire gas station was surrounded with yellow tape. An investigator asked me the same questions over and over. "What did you hear? How many people were there? Did you see a face?" I gave the same answer every time. No, because the truth was, I had survived without ever seeing the person who came looking for me. The investigators later reviewed the security cameras. The intruder had kept his face hidden the entire time. He knew exactly where the cameras were. He never looked toward them. He never stayed in one place for long. Whoever he was, it didn't seem like this was the first time he'd planned something like this. By the afternoon, I was finally allowed to leave. But even as I walked away from Red Hollow fuel stop, it didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. It felt like a part of me would always be standing inside that restroom, listening to footsteps getting closer. I never went back to work at Red Hollow fuel stop. A few weeks later, the station reopened with new staff, brighter security lights, and an emergency radio that should have been there long before that night. People told me I was lucky. Maybe I was. But luck didn't feel like the right word. For months, I couldn't walk into a public restroom without checking every stall. If I heard footsteps behind me, my heart would start racing before I could even think. Sleep wasn't much better. Some nights I'd wake up convinced I was back in that last stall, listening to someone open doors one by one. The sheriff's office called me a few times during the investigation. Each time, I hoped they had finally found the man from that night. Each time, the answer was the same. Nothing. No name. No arrest. No explanation. The case slowly grew colder. Life moved on for everyone else. Mine never completely did. One afternoon, almost a year later, I drove to my brother's house. We sat on his back porch drinking coffee while the sun disappeared behind the hills. We talked about work, about family, about everything except the reason I'd come. Finally, I looked at him and asked, "Do you remember that joke you made years ago? About never locking a bathroom stall if someone's looking for you?" He laughed. "Yeah, I probably stole that from some old horror movie." I nodded. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I quietly replied, "It saved my life." The smile disappeared from his face. He stared at me, waiting for me to explain. I never did. Some stories are too heavy to tell all at once. He simply reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Neither of us spoke again for a long time. Even now, whenever I stop at a lonely gas station during a late-night drive, I catch myself looking toward the restroom. Not because I expect to see someone there, but because fear has a strange way of staying with you long after the danger is gone. People often ask me what was the scariest part of that night. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't the footsteps. It wasn't even hiding behind that stall door. It was realizing that one forgotten conversation from years earlier became the only thing my mind could remember when everything else disappeared. Sometimes, the smallest advice can become the difference between panic and survival. And every now and then, when I hear an old restroom door slowly creak open, I still stop breathing, just for a second.